In our first episode, we saw how childcare in America was born from deep divides. But here, in episode 2, we step into what I call shallow soil. Moments where the U.S. briefly planted the seeds of universal childcare, only to rip them up when it no longer served the needs of power. World War II created one of those moments. With millions of men fighting overseas, the country turned to women to fill factories and industry jobs. And this time, unlike World War I, the government acknowledged something big. Women couldn't work without childcare. In 1941, Congress passed the Lanham Act, funding child care centers across the country. By 1943, more than 3,000 federally subsidized centers were serving up to 600,000 children. For the first time in U.S. history, the government admitted that childcare wasn't just a private family matter. It was a national need. But that acknowledgement didn't last. When the war ended, so did the funding. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's own mayor of New York, Fiorello LaGuardia, summed up the political attitude in one shocking statement. The worst mother is better than the best institution. Think about what that meant. The government decided that even the most neglectful, unprepared parent was better than a fully funded, well-trained childcare system. And that belief that mothers should be at home, no matter the cost, shaped the retreat from universal childcare. But here's the truth. Choosing to work or to stay home should never have been up to the government. It should be up to women and their families. And childcare access should not depend on government's morality test of what makes a good mother. This is also where family childcare could have been a powerful solution. Smaller, home-based settings could have offered the warmth of community and the flexibility families needed. And for many who couldn't access those big centers, family childcare became exactly that, a lifeline. But the roots of childcare licensing didn't begin in World War II. They go back further, to something more violent, the boarding school era. In the late 1800s, Native children were forcibly removed from their families and placed into institutions designed to erase their culture. The first of these was the Carl's Indian Industrial School. Founded in 1879 by U.S. Army officer Richard Henry Pratt. Pratt is the man who gave us the motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man." He believed the only way to save Native children was to strip them of family, language, and culture, and replace them with white Christian values. By 1926, more than 80% of Native school-age children were in these schools. Life inside looked less like education and more like a military camp. Uniforms, drills, silence instead of language, Christianity instead of tradition. Children were punished for speaking their language, for wearing their hair long, for simply being themselves. When they left, many were placed in white homes and businesses as low-paid servants, maids, field hands, laborers, where they faced open racism and exclusion. Some forgot their languages. Some lost connection to their families forever. And in certain states, laws even blocked them from fully assimilating, banning interracial marriage. They were treated as outsiders, even as the system claimed it was saving them. And here's why this matters for childcare history. Pratt's model of erasure through education carried forward into the early licensing systems. Childcare licenses weren't originally about safety or child development. They were about control. They were about deciding who was fit to care for children, and it almost always excluded Black women, Indigenous women, and immigrants. The same belief that drove boarding schools still linger today. The idea that Black and brown families, immigrants, and Indigenous people are less intelligent, less capable, or lazy without white supervision, that idea has never gone away. We see it in movies and TV where stereotypes live on. We feel it in classrooms where administrators treat families of color as if they don't know what's best for their own children. And we hear it when DEI programs are villainized or when books like Hair Love and Fry Bread are banned, silencing stories that affirm Black and Native children. The question we have to ask is, can you really do what's best for children if you don't see them or their families as intelligent, whole, and fully human? As we trace the roots of early childhood education through World War II and beyond, we see a pattern. What began as temporary emergency care for white women entering the workforce during the war quickly unraveled when men returned home. The message was clear. Childcare is acceptable only when it supports white male workforce needs. Once that urgency was gone, the soil grew shallow, and the growth of universal childcare was cut back. This is also when we see the rise of licensing. During World War II, the government funded childcare centers through the Lanham Act, but those centers were tightly regulated, standardized, and monitored. Family childcare homes, on the other hand, were often overlooked, seen as second class, even though they were the ones filling the gap for working class families, women of color, and communities left out of the government centers. The licensing model that grew out of that wartime moment carried the same bias. Trust the institutional center. Question the home provider. The legacy is still with us. Licensing became not just about safety, but about control. Who was deemed trustworthy? Whose labor was considered legitimate? And who was excluded? Catharine Beecher gave us two quotes that have echoed throughout our history and even into our regulations, policies, and research. She wrote, "The education of females should be such as to qualify them to become the teachers of children, for as society is now constituted, they are the only proper persons to be employed in this duty." On the surface, it sounds like Beecher was advocating for women, but her framing pigeonholed the field. It made teaching a gendered duty rather than a profession, one that was never meant to be taken seriously enough to receive the pay that could support a family. And then she went further. She wrote, "The profession of the teacher should be regarded as peculiarly appropriate to the female sex, and they can afford to labor for very small wages, as they are not expected to support a family." That second quote was a direct hit to wages. Even back then, her words were wrong, because unless you were upper middle class or wealthy, women often did have to take on side work to help their family survive. But Beecher's logic stuck. It laid a foundation where administrators, still overwhelmingly male in this field, are paid more. while women educators are expected to accept less. It's why so many leave today, citing not just low pay, but low public respect, low administrative support, and even the burden of buying most of their classroom supplies themselves. And the irony is, we have proof of what happens when women are given access to childcare. During World War II, the Lanham Act childcare in place, more than 6.5 million women entered the workforce. That was nearly 1/3 of all adult women in the country at the time. They built planes, ships, and weapons. They kept factories and farms running. They didn't just fill in, they transformed the workforce. But when the war ended, the funding ended. The message from government leaders was, quote, "The best mother is better than the best institution." And with that, centers were shut down, funding was cut, and women were told to go home. The truth is, the worst mother is not automatically better than the best educator. And more importantly, it should never be up to the government leaders to decide whether women work or stay home. That decision belongs with, again, women and their families. Family childcare could have been, and was, the safe for many families who couldn't access centers. But instead of investing in it, the system starved. And the inequities run even deeper. Early childhood education particularly suffers from women of color because women of color were not even paid the same as white women. Yet they are often the ones doing the bulk of the work. According to the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment, Black early educators are paid about 78 cents for every dollar earned by their white peers. Latina women earn even less, just 46 cents to the white male dollar in the field. This isn't accidental. It is exploitation, rooted in the same systems of racism and sexism that shaped boarding schools and workforce policies. And it is still happening today. Many women of color in childcare are barely making minimum wage for work that is both valuable and essential to society. Labor leader Ai-jen Poo put it plainly: care work makes all other work possible. Yet here in America, we treat care work as invisible, as something that should be done out of love, not as labor deserving respect and wages. That's not just demeaning, it's dangerous. Because if care collapses, everything else collapses with it. And here's the piece that rarely gets laid out loud. Women's labor has not only strengthened families, it has strengthened the entire economy. When women are in the workforce, GDP grows. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation has reported that the states lose billions every year in economic activity because of inadequate childcare. Nationwide, the U.S. is estimated to lose about $122 billion annually in productivity, wages, and revenue because families can't access affordable care. This is not just an inconvenience for parents. It's an economic crisis. When childcare falls apart, women are the ones forced to step back from work. And when women leave the workforce, we don't just lose their wages. We lose their talent, their leadership, their innovation, their tax contributions, and their spending power. So the question becomes, what happens when women leave? We've seen it. During the pandemic, millions of women dropped out of the workforce because childcare collapsed. The economy didn't just slow down, it staggered. Families suffered. Businesses suffered. The country suffered. This is not an issue of personal responsibility. It is a public good. And the roots of why we still treat it as women's private burden, those roots go back to Catharine Beecher and the very idea that women's work is cheap, temporary, and less valuable. That thinking was wrong then, and it is catastrophic now. Shallow soil cannot sustain deep roots. And when we look at the history of early childcare in America, we see how systems of sexism and racism dug out the soil beneath us. From boarding schools to Beecher's words, from wartime needs to the abandonment of families once men returned, we are still living with the consequences. But the question now is, do we continue in this shallow soil, or do we replenish it with equity, with justice, and with the recognition that care is the foundation of our future?